Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Mary Jean Pearle and John Battaglia's marriage seemed picture perfect from the outside. With their two young daughters, Faith and Liberty, they made their home in a wealthy Dallas suburb. John was handsome, charming, and successful. But behind the mask of normality lay a vicious, violent abuser who'd brutally beaten his first wife, and who made Mary Jean the new target of his irrational rages. After 9 hellish years, she divorced Battaglia. But on Christmas Day, 1999, during a court-ordered family visit, he attacked her in front of their daughters. For the next 2 years, he threatened, harassed, and stalked her. Mary Jean feared for her life, but not for the lives of the children, which whom Battaglia was never anything less than caring, loving, and gentle. But in spring 2001, when Faith and Liberty were visiting their father, Mary Jean received a message to call her daughters. Helpless, horrified, she heard her older daughters' pleading cries. Then came the sound of gunshots, followed by silence. What evil impulses had driven a seemingly devoted father to the ultimate act of violence and betrayal, and how could justice ever be served? No, Daddy, don't. A father's murderous rage, a mother's worst nightmare, with my very special guest, Irene PENCE. Thank you very much for agreeing to this program, and thank you for coming to this program, Irene PENCE.
Thank you for asking me, Dan. I enjoy being here.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have a great program. This is a fantastic, incredibly disturbing, but fascinating tale. Very important story, I think, really, in the end result. It's a fascinating story. Now, let's start off right now with, let me get you to set the stage of where this story occurs. There is a couple cities, but maybe let's start with maybe Dallas. Set this in this wealthy Dallas suburb that you spoke about in the introduction, or I spoke about in the introduction. Set the stage a little bit for us for at least the first city in this incredible tale.
Well, the actual crime occurred in Dallas, Texas, and John Battaglia was a CPA, and he met Mary Jean Pearle one night at a restaurant, and he's very handsome. He's a model for Kim Dawson that's here in Dallas, and that was just a side job because he's actually a CPA. And she is the daughter of a very wealthy family, and she was just really taken by him, and he's charming. There's no question.
Now, you start your story with another woman. The first woman of our story is a woman named Michelle Ward, and then she later is married to Dale Laborde, and she becomes Michelle Laborde, and they have a son named Billy. So take us back to Michelle Laborde. Who is she? And tell us about her life, because this is a very important part of this story.
Right. Michelle is just a fabulous, brilliant, and beautiful person. She lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and she's very bright. And she was always, graduating the top 1% of her class. And she married quickly out of college. And they had a baby about 3 years later, and it didn't work out. And so she divorced that man, but she did have this little boy. And then she decided to go to law school. And so she again graduated in the top 1% of her class. And she really wanted to teach, but her instructors suggested that she practice law for a while, and that would give her good experience for teaching. So she moved to Dallas and joined a large law firm, Aiken Gump, Strauss, Howard, and Feld, and she was very well paid. And then a fellow lawyer had introduced her to John Battaglia. And that's how they got together. And it was kind of a whirlwind romance. But then again, the handsomeness, the polish, he could talk on any subject. He's very bright and charming.
And he had done some modeling, too, so he had model good looks, about 6 foot tall. You described this guy, and obviously very charismatic and intelligent guy. So she was a little bit younger than him, if I correct on that. And tell us how they met. And you say it was a whirlwind sort of relationship.
It was. One of the attorneys she was working with at Aiken Gump introduced them. And so that's how she got to know John Battaglia.
Now, what happened, you say it's a whirlwind, what happened quickly in the relationship? How did it develop, and how serious did that relationship become?
Well, they were dating, and she started noticing troubling signs about him. He carried a gun, and he seemed to get nervous and irritated easily. And she was thinking about breaking up with him, and then she found out she was pregnant. And she didn't want to marry him, but her mother kind of shamed her into it, you know, don't have an illegitimate child, so forth, and that's why she married him.
Now, what was her belief, though? Was she really confident that this man may change? Because you really do express a sort of duality that he was, especially in the beginning, such a loving and doting person. And part of the reason why she trusted him is because of how he dealt with her son, Billy.
Right. He always professes to have loved children, and he would go over to her house and play with Billy before they would go out, and she wondered was he really more interested in Billy because he showed such love for him.
Right. That's very interesting. Now, so obviously they were married, and how did the relationship proceed? How did his behavior change or escalate?
His behavior changed rapidly, actually, when the daughter that they had, the second child that Michelle had, after she was born, probably only 2 or 3 months old, he got mad at Michelle because he didn't think she was paying enough attention to him, and he hit her and knocked her down with the baby in her arms. So that was the first ringing of the bell to make her realize that something terribly wrong was in her marriage.
Now, as a result of this assault, how did she proceed, and her reaction to this assault obviously led to his further behavior. So what did she do, and what did she not do as a result?
Well, her problem was that she didn't do anything. She was embarrassed that she was beaten by her husband, so she didn't tell her family. When she went to work one day, her secretary noticed bruises, so she took her to the ladies' room and showed her back, how purple it was from John's fist. And so then another lawyer came by after they got out, and he said, "Is anything wrong?" And Michelle said, "Oh, no, everything's just fine." It's sort of the typical abused wife syndrome, and we're talking about a very, very bright woman.
Right. So at what point does she contact, well, obviously she confides in somebody at work, but who does she further contact, if anyone? What's her next step, and how does his behavior still further escalate?
Well, when he beat her again, she called the police, and so tried to get them to do something to keep him away from her, but he would come back with flowers and apologies and promises that he was going to change, and she believed him, which is a typical pattern.
And there would be some change for a certain period of time, but...
He was on a 3-month cycle. He would be able to clean up his act for about 3 months, and then, he essentially was bipolar. And so that's kind of what triggered everything. He didn't like the meds that made him more calm, and so he didn't want to take those. He was a real controller, and the fact that he didn't have his meds. Just he spun out of control about every 3 months.
So this assault, how serious was this assault, and what was the police and their reaction, and tell us a little bit more about that court case and the result.
Well, the police, unfortunately, as with Mary Jean, they just didn't take domestic abuse seriously enough. And she would file papers on him, and he would manage to wiggle out of it. The most serious assault that John Battaglia did was after they were divorced, when he beat her so terribly and broke her nose and dislocated her jaw. But before that, though, she made up her mind she was going to get divorced.
Now she moves out, or has him move out of the home. There is some other features as well, including stalking. Tell us about the stalking, because it's one thing to be peeping or following. He went to much more extreme levels.
He was really clever in that, Dan, because she was under such peril with him. She hired a lawyer, and he told her to keep a log of all the things that he had done, so they could present this to the judge, and perhaps that would get someone's attention, the judge's attention. So I had the benefit of Michelle's log. You know, like on Thursday at 2 o'clock in the morning, he came over, and she would get the locks changed on her house,
right.
And he would call the locksmith and say, "Oh, I locked myself out. Would you please make me a new key? I just feel so silly about this." And, smart, charming, good-looking goes a long ways. And so the locksmith would make him a new key. And then if that happened again, then he'd call a different locksmith. But she would wake up some mornings, at 1, 2 in the morning, and he'd be hovering over her bed and threatening to, hit her. "I could really take care of you now, and I've got control of you." And she was scared to death.
Now, what did the police do as these beatings and stalkings and threatening phone calls, and could she not get a restraining order against them? It seems incredible that she couldn't get anything done. You say, well, they didn't really treat domestic violence so seriously, but how could she not get protection from this man?
Well, she sued for divorce, and that she was going to go that route. And she actually went through her father, who was also a lawyer, and she finally had to tell her parents that John is beating me, I've got to leave. And so her father, who lives in Louisiana, had called friends in Dallas and said, "I want the name of an attorney that can help my daughter with domestic abuse." So someone gave her a name, and she went to him, and it was all laid out for a protective order where John wouldn't be able to come within 500 feet of her.
Right.
And one night he came in and just came into the house and stole some things out, and she was furious with him, and he said, "Well, you can't do anything about this." And she said, "I have a protective order," and she called the police, and they came and checked on it, and she didn't have a protective order. The lawyer that her father had suggested through a friend had not filed the protective order, so it wasn't on record.
Incredible.
Therefore, the police couldn't do anything about John coming into her house, because it was also his house too.
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah, you could really get the sense of horror that this woman was having. There was no solution to what she was dealing with whatsoever.
No, she was a sitting duck.
Wow. And her parents were very active after they had been notified of this violence, and it's not like they weren't important people, and they certainly had some means as well.
Right.
So what eventually happened? What did she have to eventually do to be able to?
Well, she had to move back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, because she was just too much of a sitting duck in Dallas. She had to quit her fabulous job at the law firm, very prestigious law firm, and she went back to Louisiana, and she was able to enroll her children in a private school back there, and eventually got a job teaching law at the University of Washington in Baton Rouge.
Now, did the harassment end immediately when she moved to Baton Rouge? Was that the end of the story?
No, he tried legally then. He tried to get her, to find her, and to get her to come back to Dallas because he was interfering with his parental custodianship. And so she had to fly back to Dallas at least once a month to answer all these charges in court. Somehow he managed to get the attention of judges when she couldn't, and she was really the victim.
He was trying everything from trying to get her to pay spousal support and to get custody more than, to call her an unfit mother. He did everything in his power to harass her through the courts.
Right. He got a lawyer for the divorce initially, and the lawyer said, quit your job so that your ex-wife will have to pay you support. So he did.
Oh, incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, John Battaglia he's an accountant, but also another sort of aspect of his personality is he's also a whistleblower, and he's also a person that thinks he's very, very efficient and knows how to run things if he can. So part of his personality. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in John Battaglia's life as well.
At that time, you mean with the RTC?
Right.
He was working, still as an accountant, and so he had access to the files back then, and he was upset with a company that was supplying the RTC with the information on the files because banks had gone bankrupt, and this was back in the 80s when they had to close a lot of properties and sell them off and get them out of their books. And so he actually joined with the government, U.S. government, and they sued this company for overcharging the U.S. for their services.
Right.
And it really flipped upside down, and the company had good lawyers, and they were able to show that they were doing a good job, and John Battaglia blew a whistle that shouldn't have been blown, and it all blew up in his face. And that really made him further angry. This is when he was married to Mary Jane Pearle.
Now, how did he meet Mary Jane Pearle? And, tell us how he met Mary Jane Pearle. And
that was when they were at a restaurant, and she was with friends, and she saw this handsome man looking at her from across the room, and her friends were kidding her about it. And, he really, it looks like he's interested in you. And so pretty soon the man was over there. And all her friends thought he was cute and had a great sense of humor, and they just urged her on that this is the guy for you, Mary Jane. And she agreed.
Now,
she knows how to behave.
She was still in high school at that time.
No, she was out of high school then.
She was out of high school?
Working for her mother's antiques company.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I stand corrected. Okay,
mm-hmm.
But she was much younger than him. It was quite a few years in difference. So that's
she was a few years younger. Mm-hmm. He was more the same age.
Yeah, she was very impressed with his worldliness and what the image he could convey to these younger girls.
Right. Well, like I said, he could talk on any subject. He's very well read. He knows art and literature. I mean, this, without being bipolar and such a control freak, he could have been just a really fine person because he was, intelligent and good looking.
Right.
But he didn't use it right.
Now, how did Mary Jane Pearle and John Battaglia's relationship develop? Did it develop any differently? Obviously, it must have been somewhat different than his original relationship with Michelle Laborde, but tell us how their relationship progressed and how quickly did she see some of the signs that eventually would lead to disaster?
Well, when they got married, her parents, who were wealthy, gave them the house. It was the family home, and they just gave it to them.
Right. And
so they moved into this nice big 4-bedroom house, and John kind of felt kept. He wants to be in control, but the fact that his wife owned the house bothered him somewhat. But he right off, I guess he snored, and Mary Jean couldn't sleep with him because she was pregnant soon after they got married, and she wasn't getting her rest, and so she'd go to another bedroom, and that angered him. And so, first of all, it was mainly verbal abuse with Mary Jean. And then the baby started coming, the first little girl, and again, John apparently did love children, but he hated Mary Jean more than he loved the children, so that's why the ultimate ending of this. But while these children were being born, he played with them, he loved them, and so he enjoyed these two little girls.
Now, how was his relationship with his own child, with Michelle Laborde? How was that relationship?
Well, they would come over, and when the girl got a little older, she would sometimes they'd meet halfway. Sometimes Michelle would put her on the plane and send her to Dallas to spend a weekend or so with John, and that was pretty good. And then she loved her little stepsisters, her half-sisters that were, of the second marriage.
Right.
And so that was fun for Michelle's daughter to do. And then one turning point was when she came over for Christmas. And John, who wasn't supposed to be in Mary Jean's home, they were divorced at this time, and he came in, I guess, in his mind, going back in, seeing, well, at this point now, it's the second home that her parents had given her. And it's a $4 or $5 million home in Highland Park, Dallas. And it's beautiful, and he goes in and he sees all the presents she was able to give the daughters, and he can't do that. And he becomes upset. So he followed her up the stairs and beat her to such a point that he even pulled her hair out in spots, and so it's on the floor. And Michelle's daughter sees all this,
right,
and that will forever mark the relationship that she has with her father.
Right. Yeah, so the relationship instantly changes at that point. She has no more tolerance for her father, right?
Right. She's on guard.
Okay. Now, what else goes on? I mean, obviously we're going to get to the point where this, the eventual day, but how does it further progress after this beating, after his daughter from the original marriage thinks he's a monster? What happens next?
Well, Mary Jean is not timid about calling the police and going to court and trying to do something about John. But the cooperation she got or lack of cooperation was just incredible. John was able to talk judges out of being held accountable, that if he tricked Mary Jean one day and said, let's meet before we have our court date for a protective order. Let's meet, and I'll sign those papers for divorce. Now, he did not want a divorce because this was plush living where he was with her. And so Mary Jean fell for it, and she thought she was going to meet first for the divorce, and of course she gets to that court, and they have no record of it. And so she realizes what the situation was. So she called the second courtroom she's supposed to be in, and she said, I'm coming. There's been a problem. And the judge wouldn't hold the time. And so when it was time for court proceedings to take hold, the judge says, well, it must not be very important to her. So he was going to cancel the protective order request. Right. And Mary Jean's, the attorney would be district attorney, knew what the situation was. And she said that they would have to say they weren't ready and give us, the minimum they could wait was 6 weeks. And so the judge agreed to that.
Right. Now,
go ahead. No, I'm just going to say, the judge hurt himself politically over this case, because there's the court advocates that just happened to be in the courtroom that day were seeing what was going on, and they were horrified by it. And so the judge in this case was going to run to be the district attorney, run against the current one. And Mary Jean and these court advocates got on television and told them what this judge had done, and he lost the election.
Right. Well, in terms of the end result, that's no wonder, and that's, these people run on a law and order sort of platform, right? So.
Right.
Now.
It wasn't believable.
Now, this person has had these violent rages, but we talked about his work, his undercover work, and this blowing up in his face. And it really blew up in his face because it looked like something that's going to make him a lot of money. We're talking millions of dollars, which would set him straight, and he thought he would get he'd have his own money instead of feeling like he was kept or feeling like he'd been just kicked out of a couple wealthy homes and good situations. So he thought he was going to make a lot of money from his undercover whistleblowing work. And in fact, because of something he didn't do, it specifically blew up in his face and was especially bad. So his legacy, the money that he thought he would make, his reputation was damaged. So this seems to be the final trigger. Not that he needed too many triggers to do anything over the top, but tell us about what happens after this, and tell us about it.
Well, he thought he would get $4 or $5 million because he figured there were $100 million that this company had overbilled the government,
right.
And he just knew that he was going to get her a percent of that. And when it didn't come to fruition, he was furious with himself, all the time he had wasted, his own clients in his CPA business that had he was doing work for. He didn't give them the attention they needed, and so that business wasn't doing well. And he turned it all on Mary Jean. This was just something that she was responsible for. And he was, like you say, he was jealous that she had the money, and he thought for once that he would be independent financially. But he was really in the hole then.
So tell us what he did do, and tell us about the fateful day in question and what happened. Take us through that entire day and as much information as you had and put in your book. Tell us a little bit, as much as you can, about that day in question.
Everything I wrote in the book.
Well, no.
Let me write it. I remember read it. He started out. He knew because of he was on parole at this point. He had to report to his parole officer. And at one point, the parole officer said, "The courts have asked for your file, John. So there's a chance you're going to be arrested." And that was the ultimate control. He wanted to be the controller. The fact that Mary Jean had any control over him was absolutely the last thing he wanted. So he spent the day calling friends, trying to get them to talk Mary Jean out of doing this and drop the charges, Mary Jean, so I don't have to go to jail. And so that didn't go anywhere because the friends, we had called Michelle Getty in Louisiana, and she was busy at school, and so she didn't get the calls till later.
Right.
But he went through all that, and then he was supposed to pick up the girls in a shopping center at 6 o'clock, I believe. And he had his current girlfriend call because he wasn't allowed to call Mary Jean, and she said, "Yes, that's okay. We're planning on John being here or having the girls." And the girls at this point did not want to be there. And I think there's some of these things that went on that night that haunt Mary Jean to this day, because the youngest one, 6-year-old, she was hiding. She did not want her mom to find her and take her to meet her father.
Okay. And
the 9-year-old didn't want to go either, but she was sort of resigned to it. And they looked all over, and they found this little girl underneath her bed, shaking and scared and so upset that she was going to have to be with her father that night. And that's something that Mary Jean has always felt badly about, like she delivered her baby to her killer. But anyway, they did go ahead and they met at the shopping center. And also what haunts her, seeing the girls for the last time and how sad they look and their sad little waves to their mother. And it was just very heart-wrenching for everybody. And then,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, after that, Mary Jean was going to go to a meeting, and she got a call from her mother. In the meantime, John had taken the girls back to his loft that he lived in at the time and told the older one to call the mother. He had a question. In fact, the question was, why is your mother trying to put me in jail?
Right.
And so Mary Jean wasn't home, so he called her mother, and the mother used called Mary Jean's cell phone. And she was able to get hold of her and said, call, your girls, they're down at the loft, and they have a question for you. So that's the tragedy of it all. She called. And so the old 9-year-old answered and said, she's crying, Mommy, why are you trying to put Daddy in jail? And she said, oh, John, don't do this to them. That's when the gunfire started. And he was killing those little girls, point blank. And they were screaming at him, no, Daddy, no. And that's why the title of the book, because that was just so heart-wrenching.
Even the one daughter was running away from her father, and Mary Jean had told her to run?
Oh, yes, run, babies, run. The 9-year-old was on the phone, and so John killed her right then while she was on the phone. And so John was on speakerphone. So Mary Jean screamed then at her, run, babies, run as fast as you can. And that little 6-year-old took off. And she was about 10 feet from the door when he finally shot her and killed her. He went through an execution style. They were probably dead, but he wanted to make sure that Mary Jean would never have them again. So he shot them both close blank in the head.
Yeah, destroying them. Yes, completely. And he also then followed that up with something to the tune of Merry Christmas, Mary Jean?
He left a message after the girls had died. He called their phone at home. And Merry expletive Christmas, Mary Jean. And then he left another call that telling the daughters, you were so brave tonight. I was really proud of you. You're in a much better place now. And that just fractured Mary Jean.
Now, Mary Jean doesn't really know what's going on. She thinks that this could be the worst nightmare she could ever, and ever have.
Right.
But she still has got the wits about her, incredibly, to call the police or to get the police involved with this. So what's her next step, and what incredibly happens in this next turn of events with Mary Jean and John and her children?
It's just a continuing scenario. She's at a friend's house. She stopped by from the meeting, and she said, my mom has called and wants me to call the girls. And so she's there when she hears this phone call, this horrible phone call. And so she tells her friend to call 911. Well, she does. Her friend does call them. But the operator just doesn't get it. She writes it down as a domestic disturbance call.
Right.
And so the police put it on the back burner.
Sure.
And so Mary Jean gets in her car, races down to the loft, which is near downtown Dallas, and she beats the police there. They hadn't even there wasn't one squad car, one ambulance, nothing. And she said to the operator, she got on the phone after a friend called them, that she had talked to her husband and the children at the loft, and she heard gunshots, 5 or 6. And the woman said, a disturbance, a domestic disturbance. It's like she hadn't heard. So she didn't turn this call in the extreme that it should have been. So the police put it on back burner and were going to take care of it when they had time. So when she got down there to the loft before anybody, and she was out there screaming and waving when a police car would go by. And so this one officer was just coming back from a traffic report. So he stops and listens to her, and he's amazed, too, that there's not just a storm of squad cars and ambulances and everything. But they finally got the personnel that they needed. Of course, it was too late.
So a couple other cops arrive, and there's a tenant that's able to let them in, but they're not even quite sure. Mary Jane, in her confusion, isn't quite sure, gives them the wrong address in her statement, and actually John had been moving from one apartment to another apartment in the building, so there was some confusion between at least 2 of them, Mary Jean,
right,
and
there was
also
a lot of
the
confusion.
police.
Right, but she was able to get them the correct loft number by the time she was down there, but the problem was that the operator just didn't treat it as serious.
Right. Now, when the police go in there, tell us about just briefly, if you can, about what they did find there and what they didn't find. Where's John Battaglia? And
right. Well, they had to kick the door in, and the first officer is now there with 2 others. So there's three policemen in the loft, and it's hazy and smoky from all the the fired guns, and the little 6-year-old is lying on her tummy just about 10 feet inside the door. And, it's just a horrible, horrible scene. And so they assume that John's in there hiding, ready to jump out, although they've kicked the door in and no way even to lock it after them. So it's open. One of the guns is sitting there by a table. He could have come back in and taken care of them, so they had to be very cautious about how they did this, and they started searching. And they searched the entire loft, and it was difficult because, he was just moving in, everything with packing boxes, a lot of things stacked up. There were lots of places for him to hide. But they ended up finding 15 firearms,
right,
pistols and long guns, and he had a real arsenal there. Right.
Now, they searched the other apartments as well, the roof, all kinds of things in and around that building.
They did.
Where's John Battaglia?
John had several girlfriends, and he went to a couple of their homes, and they weren't home. And so he more or less crashed at one of the friends a girlfriend who never locked her door. He could just go in there. And he had taken a lot of tranquilizers after he had killed his daughters. And so he was kind of dizzy and frustrated. And at this point, he's sick to his stomach, and he passes out at this girl's house. And so about 10 o'clock, this happened around 7. So about 10 o'clock, the girl comes home with her date, and they see John passed out. And they wake him up, bring him into the living room, and he wants some drugs. And her boyfriend isn't into that. And he says, well, I'm out of here. So he leaves, and then John gets back with this girl, and he said what he really wants, after some drugs, is some tattoos. He wants a big yellow rose and a big red rose with his daughter's names on them, on his arm, so that they'll always be with him. And he offered to get a tattoo for this girlfriend. So they went on down up to a place not too far from the loft where they did tattooing. And so this is around midnight that they're down there getting tattooed.
Now, the police have a description of his vehicle, and a observant police officer finally, after, again, amidst all this confusion and many hours later, spots his vehicle, and then is either he decides or he's instructed to wait till someone comes out to the vehicle.
Right. They knew that it was John's vehicle, and this was probably after midnight, and the police tried to hide, and there's parked. The vehicle of John's is in a parking lot, so they're in an adjoining, across the street, and so the people that had unmarked police cars and all this, they're waiting for John, and they have no idea what he's wearing, and it's midnight, it's dark, and finally they see him come out and open that truck by remote, so they knew they had their man. So 4 of them immediately went over there and grabbed John. And he wasn't going to give up. In fact, police I talked to said they were pretty sure that he wanted suicide by cop.
Right.
And because he was fighting them. And they blacked an eye. They did, they had to do a lot of things because he was strong. And he was a very fit person. And so he wouldn't show his hands to the police, and he tried to make it as difficult. And I think he really did want them to shoot him, put him out of his misery.
Now he's taken into custody, and how do police proceed? What is his demeanor? What does he do? Does he talk to police, or does he lawyer up immediately?
Well, he's quiet going on in, but he had a court-appointed attorney, the defense attorney, and the Judge Warder, who officiated over the case, called Paul Johnson, an excellent attorney, that morning. So he was just a few hours without a lawyer. And Paul immediately went to the judge's quarters, and he agreed to take the case. So John had appointed attorney right away.
What was John's demeanor when the police initially arrested him and had him in the car after they had subdued him? You make some interesting comments. What was his demeanor?
Well, he didn't say any. Oh, I know what you're talking about. He's acting like nothing had happened in the loft previously. He has questions about the computer that all the police cars have, and he asked about things like that. Then when they got him down to the court, he asked, well, isn't this the same place they brought Jack Ruby after he shot Oswald? And his mind was going, he's two different people. Sure. He can absorb a situation and be someone different. No, it was, he was shocking the police by his demeanor. Right.
Now, at the same time, just for those that this is one of the incredible parts of the book as well, is that Michelle Laborde is almost at the same time, simultaneously, around the same time, fighting for legislation that would protect women like herself as being married to a man like John Battaglia, and also for Mary Jean.
Right.
And for those women to get the kind of protection that they've both gone through and had no safeguards from a guy like this, it could quite easily look like he could manipulate the system, but she was creating. So tell us about that situation almost at the same time.
Right. Michelle was, she's this brilliant law professor, and because of her many accomplishments and speaking out on spousal abuse, domestic violence, she is named Woman of the Year in Baton Rouge.
Right.
And she thought, I'm going to do something with that. I think that if she got some publicity out of this, and she decided that she was going to try to write some laws herself. And she got on the governor's committee to write legislation. And she had taught some students of lawyers of the legislature in her law classes over at Washington. And so she called them. She said, she had no shame. She just wanted to make this work, and if she had to use her contacts, she would, whatever. And she did. She got appointed to this committee, and she actually ended up writing these laws where if you violated your protective order, then you had to serve some jail time, and not this probation and just a pat on the hand.
Right. Well, another interesting aspect, and in fact, well, beyond interesting, incredible, is that Mary Jane had the wits about her and just her capacity to feel for someone else. And again, she felt for Michelle Laborde for her safety, in despite of the certain, it almost seemingly disastrous, fateful event that just happened with her children. She has the wits about her to call Michelle to warn her that John Battaglia might be coming her way. She didn't really know.
And that's what she was thinking of. He's killed these two daughters. He only has one daughter left. Could he possibly be on a plane to take care of that daughter? And so that's why she called Michelle to warn her. And Michelle had just come in after that call came to her from Mary Jane, and so she knew the horror of John Battaglia and how awful he could be. That she didn't take it lightly. She called her sister, and her sister picked her up with her daughter and took her to their house, so she wouldn't be home in case John was going to come and kill her daughter.
Incredible. Now, this person has again, you talked about Paul Johnson is assigned his case, his murder trial.
Yeah.
This becomes a capital case, and that means the death penalty is on the table.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how they proceeded in terms of trying to defend John Battaglia to this obviously monstrous crime.
Well, the most difficult thing that Paul Johnson did was to try to find a jury. He couldn't get anybody to serve. He couldn't get anybody. He eventually got 12 people, but not of his choosing.
Right.
But he wanted people to say, I'm against the death penalty. No, I wouldn't give the death penalty. And that sort of thing. Well, he wasn't finding that.
Sure.
And so I sat for 3 months at the courthouse with John Battaglia and his attorneys and the DA trying to find 12 people, well, it's 12 plus one alternate, that Paul Johnson thought would give John a fair trial.
But to be fair, one of the criteria is that you haven't heard anything about this crime, and because of the heinous and extreme and incredible story that it was pretty hard to find people who hadn't heard anything about this. Wasn't that true?
Absolutely. They had 800 or 900 people in the jury pool, and that's why it took so long to go through. And first of all, they filled out a 7 or 8 page quiz on their thoughts and their experience with law and so forth. So they had a lot of people to talk to, and it was very difficult to get that jury together because, as Paul Johnson told me afterwards, I guess I couldn't have found 12 people in the city of Dallas that would not have given him the death sentence. But you say about the notoriety of it, it was splashed all across the Dallas Morning News. When I opened up the paper that morning, I just knew instantly, I'm going to write this book. This story has got to be told.
Yeah, so that's a question I didn't ask you. You came to this story based on your own initiative. A publisher didn't say, hey, why don't you write a story about this? You came to this story yourself and said, hey, I got to write this story.
Right.
Great.
This is my 4th book. And so I'd already written 3, and the publisher, just assuming, very open, wonderful publisher, Kensington,
right.
that if you come up with another idea, let us know. And this was so horrific that I didn't ask. I just said, here's my next book. This is what it's going to be about. And they just said, go for it.
Well, of course, it's an incredible story. There's no way that it wouldn't appeal to people to read. It's just I mean, obviously this thing was a major high-profile case and trial, and it had all the elements. As soon as you have handsome people and innocent victims, you can't get more innocent than a person's children. I mean, it's one of the most horrible cases I've ever heard of. So it's very understandable.
That's the thing about true crime. In fact, I'm a court volunteer, like the court advocates. I'm down at Crowley Courthouse once a month and overseeing domestic abuse cases and protective orders.
Wow.
And every now and then I run into Paul Johnson, and I'll say, well, do you have another story for me, Paul? Mm-hmm. And he'll say, not like that one, not one that's book worthy. But, he said, but there's a lot. But it's, it's someone who doesn't have much, who has few options. That's what you normally run into.
Sure.
But like you say, I mean, a Kim Dawson model and a CPA that passed the CPA board the very first time he took it. I mean, it's just an incredible mix of characters.
And even Michelle Laborde, a beautiful, intelligent, highly motivated, getting the attention of governors is no easy feat. And getting that legislation together, having no real political background. Exactly. I mean, certainly her parents had means, but she went over and beyond, what her potential was because she was so personally involved. And it is so, it's such an ironic situation for her to have this legislation passing in state legislation, while her ex-husband who would have certainly, if she would have not escaped this man, she would have been this victim, right, is setting up legislation so that, I know it's cliche that this will never happen again. There has to have been, unfortunately, these kinds of cases to have the impetus to be able to create this legislation. Unfortunately, but at least there is some happy ending that this person's convicted. Tell us what the outcome of this case was in the end. Did he get his just desserts? Did he get the death penalty?
He got the death penalty, and I'm not necessarily real pro death penalty.
Right.
But if anyone deserves it, it's John Battaglia. Because here's what's happening, Dan. There are a lot of people that are anti, and that's fine. That's their position, and I respect it. However, this is what's happening in Texas. John Battaglia has his own website. The people who are anti-death penalty want to help out these poor guys that are sitting on death row.
Sure.
They provide him with a cell phone. They allow him to, on a computer, to write out these stories. He is still abusing his two ex-wives. He is saying they're lesbians, they're cocaine heads. I mean, he just can't say enough about them, in his view, to make them seem unappealing, to seem like losers. And they're anything but. And so that is what's going on as we speak. And it's frustrating. In Texas, it's automatic appeal if you're given the death penalty. And we are paying like $200,000 a year to defend John's appeal.
Sure.
And this happened 10 years ago, and it's still going on. But Mary Jane continued on. The problem, of course, was not having supervised meetings with an abusive parent. And she has gotten $25,000 as a grant and has opened the Faith and Liberty, the name of her children, house at the family place, where abusive parents can still meet with their children in a supervised setting.
Right.
So that's been brought around.
Sure. Yeah, a little bit of a bright...
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's incredible that throughout this book, it was just amazing to me. I know I've heard countless stories of missteps, but this was a confluence of inaction, apathy.
It went on for years.
The judge said he was very good. You're in trouble when a psychopath goes to court and the judge is commenting on their good looks. Like, who cares? But it shows you That's all it takes sometimes. He's
I know
good looking,
what
he's charming, he's intelligent, he has money. Yeah, but what about his actions? And so, too little, way too late. He never received any jail time, and his ultimate trigger was that he might go to jail, and that's when he shot his own kids. These are the people he was supposed to love. I think if he would have had an opportunity, he would have killed both women, and obviously he didn't care about children either. So who knows what he would have done as time would have went on. He was capable of, obviously anything. So. Well,
like I said, he had an arsenal. He had 15 guns.
Sure.
And, of course, when you're on probation from being a protective order violator, you're not allowed to have one gun. But it just nothing bothered him. No law. He just thought he was bigger than all that.
And like you say, there was some political heads rolled that judge that that made that grave error. His political career was finished.
That's right. That's right. It definitely was. And that's a good thing, because that's he just wasn't caring about this topic. So that's what happened. But there's been there's Michelle Getty's laws enacted by the state legislature, and then there's this visiting place, and it's really well used in Dallas, and that's a good thing, but not enough has been done.
What is Mary Jean's life like now?
Well, she remarried after this. She badly wanted children. She just wanted to have more children. She just severely loved those girls. But she was 40 when this took place.
Right.
And she remarried, but she never had any more children. And as far as I know, she's still involved in her mother's antique business and lives in her beautiful house in Dallas.
So this must have devastated her, but it didn't completely destroy her. She's still a functioning woman, trying to live a life.
Better than I could have done.
Right.
It just, I never felt so sorry for anybody in my life. But she was poised at the trial. She gave her victim's impact statement to John, and she did a really good job, really great job.
Now you spoke of.
Go ahead.
Sorry, you spoke of testimony. Did Michelle Laborde also testify? His first wife. Did she testify?
Michelle testified in the punishment phase.
I see.
When she got up and told the jury how he had broken her nose and dislocated her jaw and all that, complete with pictures. I think that was the final straw. This man was just thoroughly evil through and through. And I think it took 18 minutes for the jury to decide to give him the death penalty.
Now, you spoke of the bipolar, and, we won't go into a discussion about that. We don't have too much time at all, but obviously the courts didn't take that too seriously in consideration, obviously, if you're going to give them the death penalty with this bipolar. And for everybody that is bipolar that doesn't resort to killing their children or committing any kind of murder.
Right. There are degrees.
So, but you did say if this wouldn't happen and that would have happened, you really believe that bipolar was that much of a reason for his eventual...
What ran in the family, his mother committed suicide when he was 17.
Right.
And she suffered severe bouts of depression. And so, in fact, she was institutionalized now and then. And in fact, it was not the night before she was to go back. Her husband was going to put her into an institution, and that's when she killed herself. But John had, in fact, his defense attorneys brought this up at trial, that he was bipolar, that all he needed was his meds, and he'd be just fine. But the jury didn't buy it.
And what do you think?
Oh, just knowing what he did. I was privy to so much information that it's typical of somebody like John who likes control. He wouldn't have taken his meds. He wanted that high euphoric feeling,
right,
of the manic part of bipolar. So
right.
he wouldn't have gone that route. Well, he still hasn't. He has his website, and he's still bashing his wives.
Yeah,
So
incredible.
he hasn't changed. He hasn't
Well,
changed
lucky
yet.
people have to really find websites. So, how many people are really listening to this person will be negligible. Let's say, of course, there's the damage, but it's not the same as the public harassment that he could have. He doesn't have a newspaper, we'll say, or hopefully he doesn't. Or he's not able to call them. So, but
Well, for several.
Pardon me. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for several years, while still on death row, there was a fascination with him with like television news shows, and they would go and interview him, and so you'd see him on TV laughing and say, "Oh, this just had to be. This just was meant to happen," which made him look stranger.
He didn't get remarried in prison as many of these Night Stalker and some of these guys?
I don't know. John's written me a couple times, but I find him so thoroughly horrible that I never answer his.
Yeah.
But I do the others I've written about if they want to write and ask questions, or I might even ask them questions about a case. And so, but John is just so thoroughly disgusting.
You had enough of John Battaglia.
I had enough of him.
Like,
yeah,
that's it's an incredible book, Irene. I want to thank you very much for sharing your incredible book with us. I want to tell the audience they've been listening to Irene PENCE with her book No, Daddy Don't. Incredible book, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the program, Irene, and I want you to have a good evening and the best of luck with any more projects, and of course, I'd love to get you back on the program, talk about another one of your books sometime in the near future. So,
thank you, Dan. I've enjoyed it.
Well, I have too, and thank you very much, and you have yourself a good evening.
You too. Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Have a good evening.